After a workmanlike victory over Indiana, Wolverines back on the road this weekend to discuss the victory over the Hoosiers and the trip to Happy Valley. We welcome in Anthony Bellino. You see him every morning right here on BCSN with the X's and Bros show. Anthony, thank you for joining us.
Mark, as always, it is a pleasure, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing on this November day as the Wolverines, they needed that bounce back win after the loss to Michigan State, and leading into the game against Indiana, the mantra was somebody's going to pay, and this week Indiana's going to pay, and that is what happened Saturday night in the Big House.
Yeah, you mentioned the term workmanlike, and that's exactly what it is. I really felt like the gist of this football game was probably the first 7 weeks of the season. It was going to be very run heavy, which is exactly what they did. Blake Corum going down with injury, that raises concern. But Hassan Haskins, carrying the load, he has as many running yards in that football game as Cade McNamara had passing yards. And it's just like one of those things where you look back and I think they were dead even at 168 yards apiece. So you look back at the game very much like the first, 7 weeks or 6 weeks of the season, or seven, I should say, run the ball a whole bunch. Don't rely too much on the passing game, control the clock, control the tempo of the game, the speed of the game. And all in all, pretty quiet. I was surprised to see J.J. McCarthy throw it 10 times. Surprised to see that he threw an interception. I don't know. This is a topic we've talked about multiple times here on this program, Mark. But I don't know if, later on in the season when you get to the big two state teams after a loss to the other state team, you look at Penn State and Ohio State. I don't know if you necessarily need to play J.J. McCarthy unless it's like break glass in case of emergency. Cade McNamara gets hurt or something like that. Last week, him going 5 for 10, throwing an interception. You just, I just don't know if that's a necessity right now. I think you really got to buckle down with what you have. You have to see if Blake Corum comes back and what kind of shape he is going to be in if he's available this upcoming week. Because if he's not, that severely hurts this football team. Because what will this running dynamic look like if it is just Hassan Haskins carrying the load and they don't have the opportunity to kind of bounce carries in between the two?
You mentioned J.J. McCarthy getting a little bit more snaps than what we thought. Part of that was because of the injury situation with Cade McNamara. He had to sit out a few series as he's continuing to deal with some things. And Blake Corum injury, Eric All was not at 100%. We didn't see the big tight end all the time. And we also saw A.J. Henning and Andrell Anthony leave the game with injury. So this is a banged-up Wolverine team that's headed to Happy Valley on Saturday.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern there, especially when you look at a team that's struggled to put up points. 29-7 over Indiana is fine. It's a 22-point victory. You feel good about that, I guess, for the most part, because Indiana never really challenged them. But the Hoosiers are a mess this year. This is not the same Indiana team as last year. Without Michael Penix, their school has no chance. Let's just be honest and call it what it is. So. I'm not overly, thrilled. I'm not thrilled about the fact that they settled for as many field goals. I love the fact that, Money Moody's making kicks. That's fantastic. But, you get inside the opponent's 40-yard line, you got to start putting some points on the board. And that's got to be in terms of 6, because we saw that come back and bite Michigan against Michigan State. They had to settle for field goals. Red zone offense stalled out a little bit. Lack of creativity maybe in the play calling. Now all of a sudden you're kicking field goals instead of putting up 7 on the board. So that's a little bit of an issue. Then you take away A.J. Henning, incredible speed. And the little bit that we've seen him, that kid can make plays. Andrell Anthony just starting to come along, makes his first catch in the Big House. That's fantastic. At that big breakout play against Michigan State, that was great. He goes down with injury. You mentioned Eric All, the tight end. I mean, I could talk about him every week. I mean, just his overall frame, it seems like he catches everything. Reliable right there. They did get some production out of the tight end position with a couple of touchdowns, and that's a positive. But then you look at Blake Corum going down, Jamon Green going down, like that. There's a lot of injury issues. So you won the football game, but at what cost?
You mentioned the red zone inefficiency, and Jim Harbaugh, when asked about that this week, had a simple solution. Address it, emphasize it, practice it, improve it. But it's not quite that simple because they haven't been able to get that red zone offense cranking where it needs to be.
It's always easier said than done, right? And a lot of times you get into the red zone, your playbook shortens up because you just don't have as much field to work with. So, how are they going to get creative when you get inside the opponent's 20, when they could sit 2 safeties right there at the end zone? When linebackers are taking up a middle of the field, there's not a whole lot of space to operate. I don't know if they can continue to go, hey, we're just going to line up and see if we can smash it, go, 7-on-7 across the lines and just see who can win that battle. I just don't know if that's going to work. They're going to have to find a way to get a little bit more creative. That's the word I keep using because that's the word that's what I'm looking to see. see. Like, show me something that's like, ooh, yeah, that was a good play design, right? We haven't really seen any of that. It just seems so stagnant. So that's where Josh Gaddis and company's got to come in and try to put something out there on the board this week against Penn State that is actually going to work inside the 20-yard line.
A week after allowing 190-plus yards to Kenneth Walker III, the Michigan defense held Indiana's entire offense to just 190-odd yards. So the defense saw what we needed to see out of them against the Hoosiers.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, without Michael Penix, this offense really inefficient. You look at the coaching changes from last year to this year. Mike Hart has made all the difference in the world in the Michigan running game. Indiana's running game has severely dropped off. I know they had 107 yards on the ground as a team, and that's just, I mean, they don't have that big home run threat, and you could tell that their offensive game is just null and void at this point. So I think that, from that regard, Michigan did what they're supposed to do, and I really feel what's fascinating about Jim Harbaugh in the Michigan conversation is that when Michigan goes and wins this football game that they're supposed to against Indiana, it's like, well, they're supposed to win. But they dropped that game on the road to Michigan State, a very close game, very well-fought game. Michigan State loses this past weekend at Purdue, and now everybody's looking at each other like, well, now what do we do, right? So it'll be very interesting, to see how, sort of the rankings play out, and teams are kind of shuffling up and down the board a little bit. And how, when you have a win against Indiana and you win the way that you're supposed to, it's a boring win. It doesn't matter. You were supposed to. You lose against Michigan State, and it's the end of the world, and nobody can do anything, right? Every time you beat a Washington, you beat a Wisconsin, that's all fine and dandy. They weren't as good as we thought they were. If they go on the road, it's a noon kickoff in Happy Valley. I think that favors the Wolverines, but it's not that great of a game because Penn State is a little bit down. So if Michigan beats Penn State, the conversation will turn into, well, Penn State's down. They're not very good this year. But they just gave Ohio State a little bit of a push. So I think it's always very fascinating, the conversation that surrounds Michigan and surrounds head coach Jim Harbaugh.
Another fascinating aspect about the game on Saturday, perhaps the biggest cheer of the night, was when the score was announced that Purdue had beaten Michigan State. Not only were the Michigan fans happy that their in-state rivals lost, but they also realized that does give Michigan a somewhat clear path to Indianapolis in the Big Ten title game.
Still got to keep winning games, right? You got the schedule that's ahead of you. You got to go 1 week at a time. This week it's Penn State. The following week it's a road trip to Maryland, and then it's at home against the Ohio State Buckeyes. And that is going to be, you talk about a challenge of all challenges, like that is it right there. And you could really save the season with that victory. So yes, I do realize, and I saw it on Twitter, a lot of Michigan fans were very excited about Michigan State losing to Purdue. What I don't understand is, one, how that even happened, because Mel Tucker was very open about the fact that, yeah, this Purdue team, this is what they do. When they're unranked, they face a ranked opponent, they knock them off. They've already beaten number 2 Iowa. They've got something like 9 wins against the Associated Press's top 2 teams in school history. That's the most in the FBS since the poll era. Like, that's incredible. That's what the spoiler makers is what they're called. But I don't understand why Michigan fans celebrate that, right? I mean, you celebrate Purdue beating Michigan State, okay, because as you mentioned, the clear path is now open. You still have to win out and let the chips fall where they may. But a lot of fans celebrating that, I don't really like, because you didn't really handle your business against Michigan State. So how can you cheer on another team for doing something that you couldn't? Congrats to Purdue. Their quarterback threw for 540 yards. My goodness, that kid was throwing the football all over the place. O'Connell, looked like a Heisman Trophy candidate in that football game. So good on them. But I don't really root for other opponents beating, my team's opponent. You know what I'm saying? Like, an enemy of my enemy is my friend or something along those lines. Like, no, just play the schedule, beat who you're supposed to beat. You didn't take care of Michigan State. You can't really praise Purdue for doing what you could.
I think I've got an idea of your take on this next question. I'm going to ask it anyways. On Monday, Jim Harbaugh said that the Big Ten admitted to him that they had made a mistake in the Michigan State game. The Aiden Hutchinson play should have been a fumble, should have been a Michigan touchdown recovered in the Michigan State end zone. But at this point, it's over. They still lost the game. It doesn't matter if you admitted the mistake. It's over.
Yeah, he was asked the question about it, and there was a lot of fodder on Twitter because Mel Tucker was asked a couple questions about some of the officiating. He said, I don't want to talk about bad calls. It gives your coaches an out. Your program looks soft, blah, blah, blah. I understand that, but these were reviewed calls. So I think it's a little bit different than like a penalty or just a call that's out there on the field. Like, this was a play that was under review that the officials botched. He was asked the question. He answered the question to the best of, that's what else was he supposed to say? Like, no, yeah, it is what it is. Like, we had a touchdown taken off the board. It doesn't matter. Like, it did play a role in the football game, but at the end of the day, you didn't seal the deal. So I understand why people are saying, why are you talking about it 2 weeks later? But at the same time, a reporter asked the question in regards to how the Big Ten handled the situation, which was poorly, but that's Big Ten officiating as a whole, I suppose. And he tried to answer it. Now he answers it, and he gets people are going to throw stones at him for doing that. So it's a lose-lose business right now to be the head man in charge in Ann Arbor. That much is for sure.
Yeah, that's the important context. He was asked a direct question about it and a follow-up question about it. He did not want to discuss that, but he was asked the question and the follow-up to it, and so he had to do the polite thing and answer the follow-up question. So now Michigan heads to Happy Valley. As we've touched upon, Penn State a little bit struggling, but they looked really good against Ohio State. And let's face it, when Sean Clifford is healthy at quarterback for Nittany Lions, this is a dangerous team and a dangerous setting in Beaver Stadium.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I mean, Penn State's a team that's 6-3 overall. All three of their losses coming in Big Ten conference play. I mean, this is why when talking to Darian Harris, the former Michigan State linebacker, he's got 6 Paul Bunyan's in his trophy case. I don't know. I was saying 6. Somebody's got 6 Bunions doesn't sound great. But this is a team that's coming off of a big win against Maryland, one that they needed after playing Ohio State so tough, losing that 9 overtime thriller against Illinois at home, losing on the road by 3 points to Iowa, the game in which Clifford was knocked out. But they were rolling up until that point. They had a big win over a top 25 team in Auburn. They went on the road and beat top 15 Wisconsin. This team was playing some good football. So the question is, who's available for Penn State and how will that kind of fare and match up against Michigan? They're a lot different when they have their varsity quarterback in instead of their JV and their freshman guys, because that's really the way to look at it. When Clifford's in the game, that is their varsity offense. They can strike, they can give you a hard time, and they can beat you, right? If he's not available, if he gets hit, if his injury gets aggravated, then that's a little bit of a problem. I think that's where you really rely on the pass rush and guys like Aiden Hutchison, right? And Ajabo coming off the edges and try to hit Clifford every single play. I know that a lot of people don't like that, but you got to hit the quarterback. You have to put pressure on him. You have to get him thinking about you, because if he's thinking about you, he's not thinking about the football down the field, and that's where you can be successful.
We know Michigan loves to run the football. We know Penn State is very good at stopping the run. That's going to be the interesting matchup when the Maize and Blue have the ball.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, Michigan's going to want to do that. But I also think, Mark, here's kind of an interesting wrinkle here, because I prefaced this by, in our conversation a little bit ago against the Hoosiers, right? The Hoosiers game looked like the first 7 games of the season. And all of a sudden, the weather got nice, and Michigan said, let's take the top off this offense one time. Let's get the convertible out, right? It's sunny and 75, going down the coastline, and let Cade McNamara throw it around a little bit. I'm really interested to see if the last week's game against the Hoosiers kind of pairs up a little bit to what we saw earlier in the season. Let's not flex a lot of the playbook. Let's just try to win. We'll win a boring, monotonous game. We'll run the football at them 30 times. We'll control the clock. We'll dominate on defense. We'll get out of here like we did the first 7 weeks of the season. I wonder if this is a game where they put the football in Cade's hands a little bit more and allow him to throw it a little bit to try to open up a little bit of that running game.
Name of the game in November is survival. Michigan survived against Indiana. We'll find out Saturday they can survive on the road once again. I want to thank Anthony Bellino, the host of the X's and Bros Show. Anthony, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.